Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Solange, and as per usual, I am here with you at the sessions of the course Startup School of Schools. And today we are having already the third session, and we are going to be focusing on building a team. And yeah, the program, as I've been mentioning at every beginning, I think it's developed by TechHub Riga and the Investment and Development Agency of Latvia. So once more, final time, I think I'm going to remind this. If you haven't yet joined our Slack workspace, please do that, because that's the place where you can find all of the tests, where you can find all of the recordings from the sessions. So it's quite good and useful to be there if you want to sort of also officially finish the course and receive a certificate. If you just want to listen to the sessions, that's also okay, because I will keep sending out all the Zoom links via email as well. And you, of course, you have all the links in your calendar as well. So as per usual as well, if you can, please turn on your camera, because it's always a bit more pleasant to be speaking and seeing whom you're speaking to, basically seeing the audience. If you cannot, if you have any technical difficulties with your computer, if you're lying in your bed, that's all completely okay. Feel free also not to turn it on. And about the questions, of course, use the chat if you want to ask a written question, or raise your virtual hand during the Q&A part to ask a verbal question. So, as I mentioned before, today we will be focusing on building a team. We will look into what are the essential roles, how best to choose a co-founder, how to go about the recruiting process, what to ask during interviews, and we will also touch upon adapting to pivots and growth. So those are the topics you can expect to learn a bit more about today. And as I've written previously, today we have two experienced and amazing speakers. One is Daniel Zohar, co-founder at Lightstate and ex-CTO at Memrise. And the second speaker is going to be Thomas Palman, investor and founder at hoppo.io. So without further ado, I would love to give the floor to our first speaker, and it's going to be Daniel. So Daniel, welcome to the session.
Hi, thank you very much. It's great to see everyone. Yeah, I think I'll just jump straight to it. That's okay. So, see if that works. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. All right, so it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Daniel. I'm originally from Israel, currently based in Latvia. Over the last kind of 15 years, I've built and scaled a few businesses to tens of millions of users. And I've managed to also found and fail a few businesses. So I'm just going to try and give you some of my experience, share some of my experiences with you in regards to how to build a team. And before I start, just as Paul said, in the end, everybody has an opinion, and this is my own take. And I encourage you to take it with a grain of salt too. So about 100 years ago, this guy on the left, Ernest Shackleton, presumably published these ads in the paper saying, for a hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness and constant danger, safe return, doubtful, honor recognition in event of success. They were trying to do something very difficult, which was to cross the Antarctic continent. And actually didn't manage to do it. Fortunately, nobody died in this expedition, but many others did. I feel like this is kind of reflects a bit like the mentality of the startup in its early days. And I think the first thing I'll say is that building a startup is a hard and long journey. And yes, we're not starving in and freezing in the Antarctic, but there's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs. And I think the important thing is to have as much fun as you can while you do it. And in order to do that, you want to have people you enjoy working with. And I think, there's many different things you can say about how to find those people. But, the thing I've learned is that you want to kind of look for people that share the mission, share your view of the world, share your values, but also have complementary skills. You can, if you find people who are exactly like you, then more often than not, they don't add to the success of the mission. And if you don't have, you share a core belief of what the company is about and how you're trying to do things, then you're just going to end up arguing all the time. We're going to come back to this one, but let's start with a co-founder. Now, I don't know like about all of you, but some of you will start solo and will want a co-founder, and some of you might already have and consider adding another one. But as I said, like the startup journey is hard, and if you can have somebody along with you on the same level, thinking the same way, and you can speak completely openly with and kind of share all the experiences and brainstorm with, that's extremely helpful. The startup journey is stressful, it's hard, it's very rewarding, but it's not easy. And there's a lots of ups and downs, and it's useful when you have somebody else when you're down. Sometimes they're kind of helping get off the ground and they support you. But also you have different skill sets, so you can cover different areas of the business. I mean, in my head, I think co-founding is not unlike a romantic relationship. And I think that, you end up spending a lot of time with the person, multiple years, many hours every day, almost every day of the week. And that's something you should account for when thinking about whether you want to be co-founding with someone. And also, it's just useful to know that a high percentage of co-founders leave quite early on. It's because it's hard, and it's because often people don't choose the right co-founder. But it's also okay. Like if somebody works for 2 years, 3 years, help take the company to the next stage and then leaves, that's completely fine. But that's something to take into account. That's very common. So a few tips I can share from my experience and what I've seen. Firstly, it's probably worth having one, but not at all costs. So like if you don't have anyone in mind, or it's not clear what you're looking for, don't just go look for people off the street. But if you know what you're looking for, and if you have a network of friends or somebody you know, it's worth at least exploring. But if you just take somebody you don't know at all, you might bring in some risk to the business. A lot of the successful partnerships have been with people who have worked together before. And it makes sense, right? Like if you work with somebody for multiple years and then you choose to start another business with them or a business, then you kind of know what you're getting into. But regardless, if you are to choose a co-founder, just spend some time working together. Try as much as you can to simulate the working relationship, brainstorm, do the prototype, and see how it is. Are you having fun or not? And I think the last thing, which I think many people kind of take, I mean, it's important to take it seriously, but it's better to have 50% of something than 100% of nothing. Many people want to hold on to all their equity because they say, well, I'm going to make a lot of money, but if you're not going to make it, then it's not going to be worth anything. If you can bring somebody who 2, 3, 5, 10x your chance of success and the value, then it's worth giving them half of the company. It's pretty simple math. So here are just a few questions to ask yourself when deciding whether to co-found the business with someone. As I said, do you actually enjoy working with them? Do you feel like you care about the same thing? Do you share the same values? Are you in a similar place in life too? Some people, when maybe they have kids, they want a bit more flexibility. And then if they work with a student who has some different requirement, or maybe they have more time, then maybe it can be a mismatch. But also like ambition level, some people want to be like a $10 billion company and somebody wants like a lifestyle business. It's very important to iron those things out at the beginning. It's important to have a complementary skill set, especially in founders. And as I said, overall, like how much do we believe that person will increase our chances of success? So the co-founder, if they come, that's kind of the first thing. But in the end, the team is the important thing, and your team, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. Like your team is one of your most valuable assets, and you want to be getting the best people you can, and that's kind of like great ideas are nice, but usually successful companies execute well. They're not the first, they're the last. They're the best at what they do. So one just kind of general tip is that you should always be recruiting. And that's something I personally have underestimated in the past. As a founder, your role is to all the time sell the company. And that includes like potential hires. And even if you're not hiring at that particular moment, it's always worth having a chat with smart people. It's always worth keeping in touch. And there's multiple ways of kind of building those relationships. You can mentor, you can come to events, you can just have a coffee here and there. Maybe somebody comes to interview and it didn't work out for some reason, but you still keep in touch. Maybe it's somebody you worked with in the past and you see they're just really smart. And usually those kind of, it's a time investment, but usually it pays off when you need the person. If you have a good relationship and they believe in what you do, you can hire them. Now we're going to talk about kind of hiring competition, but basically everybody does ads and everybody uses recruiters, but there's some things that as founders which have more power. As I said, personal network, LinkedIn outreach. It sounds silly, but you can actually convert really good hires from LinkedIn. And if you are the founder, it carries a lot more weight than some, sorry, I don't know if there are any recruiters in the crowd, but some random recruiter kind of reaching out to you. Another maybe one tip to recruit is we've done it in the past at Memrise, is that we just added at the bottom of our emails, we're hiring engineers and designers, click here. And oftentimes people who really love your product can end up being your employees. And these are some of the best employees you're going to have because they're super passionate about what you're doing and they just kind of, they get it. So yeah, these are kind of some out of the box potentially ideas on how to recruit. Oops, sorry, it's and one more thing, like just very generally, the startups' biggest advantage is speed. Like you're always going to be outnumbered. The competitors are always going to have more money. They're going to have more everything. But the one thing you can do better is move fast. And again, speaking about early stage startups, I highly recommend looking for similarly minded people. It's not for everyone, but I think these are some of the characteristics that startup people need to have or have. And again, that's my view. But the business hopefully grows, and it grows fast, but it also needs to change, it needs to pivot. And people will need to wear many hats. People don't have the privilege, for example, to say, well, I'm a UX designer, so send it to the brand designer to do something. No, just one designer, they need to do everything. It's just as a random example. And in the past, even though I was CTO, I had to do support, or I had to move desks, so I had to do everything basically. So I think you want to surround yourself with people who are like that, especially in the early days, because you just always have to try and move faster than everyone else. So these are just some of the characteristics. And I think when you're hiring for people, make sure they understand, if they haven't been in a startup before, that they understand what it carries, because it's not for everyone. It's hard, but it's rewarding. So going back to this diagram from before, I think you should always kind of try and look for those people. So like, kind of carrying with the Lord of the Rings theme, the Fellowship of the Ring, which is the group that left the Shire to go on this very difficult mission, wouldn't have succeeded if they were all elves or all dwarves. They had to have a diverse group of people, each one with their own skill set. So while maybe when you hire software engineers, you really just need software engineers, I highly recommend trying to bring a value add with each person. It's a bonus, it's not a must. But the important thing, you're all kind of trying to do the same thing, and the people are joining, they know what the company is striving for, and they have similar, as I said before, work ethics, values, and they're going to be kind of retaining that kind of core way of working. And many people call those values, and many companies kind of establish values. But I think and this is really important. And I think many times when people say they weren't culturally fit, it can mean all kind of things, and actually sometimes it's bias. I think the important thing is just to make sure that you're very clear about what your company is standing for, and make sure you get more people like that, but also try and diversify, especially early. I think it's much harder to diversify when you have 30 people who look and behave exactly the same. All right, so kind of jumping a bit forward to the interview process. So this is kind of more or less my playbook for interviewing people. I think it's quite important to have a very structured interview, but not overly, but kind of know why you're spending time asking certain questions, and also try and get a few people in the mix. So you want to understand who are those people and what motivates them, because again, the startup needs a lot of motivation, and maybe how they behave in the past. You want to look for this cultural fit or the shared values and mission. I highly encourage kind of focusing on what they've done before, and not say, what would you do if, but can you give me an example of when, is much better, because you can actually dig into how they behaved in the past. And something very worth emphasizing is like some sort of real life task. You learn the most by working with a person, even if it's a couple of hours. And there's many different ways of doing this. It can be a take home, it can be together, and it can be verbal. But I think this is quite a key part, and I highly recommend doing so. A few more tips around kind of hiring. So I think it's really important that every role has a hiring manager. So it's really clear who is the person who eventually makes the decision on that hire. Make sure that you have a clear template with questions. You're going to be interviewing lots of people. It can end up being quite a time sink. So you want to be as organized as possible. The 1-to-4 system. So that's something which is just a kind of a small tip on recruiting. I think at the end, when there's a decision to be made, it can't be in the middle. And in the end, what we've done in the past is we kind of had 4 people interviewing a person, and at the end, each one of them voted, and we voted together. So 1 would be definitely no, 2 would be no, but could be convinced otherwise, 3 is yes, and 4 was definitely yes. And when we're sitting together and kind of voting together, we were making sure that we weren't biasing each other. But also we had to make a decision whether we like this person, or we, as in not personally, but we think we should hire them or not. So this is like a methodology I kind of recommend using. And people take it to different extent, like everybody has to vote yes, or 1 person, the hiring manager. And kind of a related thing is that as people move through the funnel and through the different stages, I think it's easier to say, well, at the beginning, if you're not quite sure, but you think they might be good, just give them the chance. But if at the end you're not quite sure, it's better to just not do it. So default yes at the beginning, default no at the end. Another thing is like everybody, most people do references, and that's good, but nobody will ever send you a reference which is not going to be good. Like they're always going to look for the best reference. It's pretty easy often to find an unofficial reference. You can ask friends, you can ask friends of friends. And also when you ask for a reference, don't try to use the something like, oh, am I going to hire them or not? Because you're never going to get anything too bad of it, but try to understand how to manage this person. How is this person going to behave? How can I make the most out of them? And last but not least is a probation period, and different kind of countries have different regulations. I don't remember exactly how it is in Latvia, but it's quite important to set a probation period and make sure that there's a clear expectation of what that looks like when the person joins. One more thing around hiring, which I mentioned before briefly. Your startup is on the right. You have Google, Apple, and all those big companies with a lot of cash on the left. You cannot compete for salary. You cannot compete for benefits. You won't be able to compete for recognition. Not at the beginning. Nobody cares. But there's some things you can compete on. You can move fast. You can show you care, personal touch. And you can give people more responsibility. And you can promise them more trajectory, like, they can grow with the company. You can be more flexible because you're small and make all the decisions. And you can also give titles. Now, titles are for free until they're not. So I kind of give dual advice here. Firstly, like be ready to be a bit more flexible with the titles, because in the end, it doesn't cost you anything. But on the other hand, when the organization grows, it might have an impact. So there's just some things you can offer that Google of the world can't, because everything is super rigid and slow and very kind of templated. Yeah, kind of, and the last piece is like with hiring, you also need to know when to say goodbye. And there's a few things around this. As I said, from a probation period, you need to make sure that person adds value to your business. As the company grows, some people are really good at 0 to 1, and then they're not really managing beyond that. And some people are just, for one reason or another, aren't kind of giving the value to the business. And as a founder, as a kind of executive of the business, you need to know, to be ready to do the hard thing. If you can't let people go, you shouldn't be in this business. Unfortunately, it's painful, but there's a way to do it well. And I think setting the expectations all the time and having honest conversations about how people are doing is a very helpful way of doing so. So yeah, I think this is just something that I have to always bear in mind, and kind of in a way, the hiring people is just the beginning. You need to know how to help them grow, how to help them succeed, and where they're not, also sometimes how to say goodbye. So just kind of a few key takeaways. Building a startup is hard. Try and have fun. Try and find the people who share your mission and values but have complementary skills. Your team is one of your most valuable assets, and speed is your biggest advantage. And know when to say goodbye. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to add myself to the spotlight now. And yeah, I can see in the chat that we have one recruiter here. You did ask the question if you have any. So Bybase recruiter. And I see that we already have a question, but like I said, we will move to the Q&A part after both of the speakers. So if we can, Jans, I see you've raised your hand as well. If it's okay with you, we will move on to the next speaker and then have the Q&A afterwards. So once more, thank you, Daniel, and we will see you again in a moment. And now I would love to give the floor over to Thomas Palman. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Daniel, definitely for the interesting and very insightful presentation. I couldn't agree more what you said. And I think I've been at least failing in all the parts that you were mentioning in my past career. But I will tell you a little bit more about team building issues and trying to go a couple of practical stories from my background. And let me just share my screen at the same time. Just a second. Perfect. So yeah, I'll just take a couple of examples related to my background and my story. So let me make it still function. So yeah, just briefly what I've done in the past. So I'm a former startup entrepreneur myself. I did actually a couple of deep tech startups. So what we were doing is actually we were measuring how fast dishes are getting clean in a dishwasher. So kind of my super skill is I know a lot about dishwashing. But in addition to that, we were able to, instead of doing that for household appliances, we did that for big breweries and dairies. So I know a lot about industrial cleaning, and we started that whole business in 2006. So basically, before all this kind of nice IoT stuff was available, or actually when big data and analytics was kind of easy to do as it was nowadays. So kind of started my experience on doing the hard way of all this analytics and software stuff that is quite easy nowadays. But eventually it took me 10 years on my first company, and then scaled it quite big, 400 people, and sold it to a US-based company. And meanwhile, we had actually, why I'm saying that I did 2 deep tech startups, we were actually able to spin off one company out of our company. And I tried to manage 2 startups at the same time. That didn't succeed well. So actually the second one we were able to sell already during the road. So that scaled roughly to a 20 people company. But basically my background is in analytics and software, but since then I sold them in 2016 and 2017 away. So since then I have been wanting to give back for the community, especially kind of, well, investing as well, but more actually into giving or trying to help the startups actually to how to make them scale faster, how to avoid the mistakes that I have been doing in the background. And since now I've been doing direct investments, maybe 37 is the current number, so quite many, but more and more I'm investing through our VC funds, and they do the hard heavy lifting of screening startups and evaluating them, and then they basically contact me if I'm adding any value to those investments. But occasionally I do still direct investments as well. And well, then since the newest thing on my background is actually that I found it myself that I'm an operator by heart. So actually I founded my third startup called hopohopo.io. We'll tell you a little bit more about what's that. But it's actually related to startups and my love child actually, how to measure startups progress before you have actually proper numbers. So how do you take as fast as possible from idea to a scaling business? So that's what we're building now. But yes, this is my background, and what I wanted to share basically is my screw ups on the scaling part. And I think Paul said at first that kind of the topic is how to do pivots and how my team is important in the pivots. But so that's kind of what I try to frame the whole story, but I'll try to frame it up based on my experiences. And we've done what I would tend to say quite many pivots during the road, but I will go in short actually how do we define a pivot and what's important in understanding the whole pivoting model. But maybe to tell kind of a couple of main stories that what I have been screwing up, and I'll start with these two pictures first. So I think if we're taking a look at managing teams, I think one of the kind of most important thing what you can screw up in startups is not making your organization and your ambition level match, meaning that both of these teams can win games, but in different games. And one of the biggest problems is if you have a mix and match and your team is not kind of in the same level, or that one of the kind of other big thing is here that if you're not actually setting up the expectations from the team aligned. So what I mean by this is that very often it's hard to think what we do as a startup, what we do next week versus where we want to be in 1 year, and what do we recruit for. So do we recruit something that will be useful for us next week, or do we try to recruit someone that will be actually very useful for us in 1 year, or something in between? And I think this is one of the important things when thinking of recruiting. What's the ambition level of, or do you want to change the organization with the next recruit, or do you just want somebody to fill in the current gaps of the organization? And yeah, the final thing is, of course, all this is kind of the game tactics, how you're playing the operations next week and the weekly operations versus where are you developing the company. If that's not clear, if that's not planned, nor that's not clearly communicated to the team, it's typically leading to a mess in the field. But I think I have great examples of how I screwed those parts up. But maybe I'll continue with this picture because I think this tells quite much about the reality of startup life. So I don't know how many of you have kids. Those are my newest startups. So I have a 5 and 2-year-old at home. You might hear some noise from the background as well. But one of the biggest issues with the startups is that actually that whenever you hire, but whenever you're actually even thinking of building kind of a new product or acquiring anything to your organization, it's hard to get that thing fitting perfectly. So it's a little bit like children's clothes, that the time that they are actually fitting perfect to the children, it's very short period of time. So you need to typically buy a little bit too big stuff to fill it. Then your startup will grow to use it. But very soon, actually, all the things that you have been developing, they are too small for your startup. And it's exactly the same from recruiting. how do you kind of align that the next team is not they are capable to grow into a certain position, but avoid that if you buy executives who are kind of not suitable for your game that you're playing, they might actually crash. So it's a little like if you buy clothes for a 2-year-old and the clothes fits for 10-year-olds, they're unsuitable. Not to say that the clothes are bad, but they just don't fit to your current state. So maybe I'll jump actually a couple of slides, go forward and a little bit fast forward. So one of the tools that we have been doing for this, and this comes now from a investor side, what I would have loved to have in my past companies and what I'm trying to use nowadays when I'm evaluating startups. But one of the typical kind of biggest issues when as an investor looking at startups is actually to understand the team experience and diversity. So especially when we start to look at this pitch decks that we receive often, I would tend to say, well, slush it's coming. I'm getting basically maybe 50 to 70 decks per day at the moment. And if we start to look at the team slides, what we see there is typically 3 phases and saying the best team ever. But the hard part of this kind of whole team structure is how do we make it actually into some frame that you could measure how good that team is for the said company. And what we have done a simple tool or Excel for this, what might help you is, and this comes actually from my own portfolio, a couple of companies as an example you can find here. So first thing to map out is basically the current team structure. So here on the y-axis, you can put out different skill sets that you typically need in a startup or in any business. So leadership, management, entrepreneurship skills, but then sales, marketing, software development, product development, business development, legal finances, the domain itself, what you're doing. And then the kind of one big angle that very often people are forgetting when they're evaluating is actually the stage of the company. And here we can, well, take different, there's different ways to evaluate the stage of the company, but we are using typical finance terms of meaning that pre-seed, seed, A round, B round. So how big the company is, has been, and hasn't been growing. And then we start to map out the team members into this chart. What this practically means is this is a good example of, so here we have on light orange, the employees, so meaning the co-founders in this case, who are actually operational roles, and then also mapping the advisors here. And meaning that, for example, in this startup, we have one person that has been in a small startups before doing software development, and another person who is actually being in a research stage companies in the early stage companies are doing research on those. Then there's a couple of actually really late stage corporate people coming in here. And not to go into details of this company, but this is something that I invested 3 years ago, one of my first investments, and they were doing roughly 20K MRR when we invested. We invested at that point with 3 million valuation on those. And I would say this is another company that I've been investing, exactly the kind of, well, almost the same numbers, valuations, so forth, but the team skill set and diversity was very different. And you can guesstimate which one of these are doing better at the moment. I don't know how to do a vote here in Zoom or how to do that nicely, but well, I can tell you already quite well that this team is doing way much faster. And the main difference between these two teams are that this team is not doing bad. They're actually great people and they're doing quite well. But the big issue here is they need to learn everything and do it by learning. So all the things almost for this team is new. Recruiting is new for them, but when they scale, when they take the next step, they just need to learn, and learning takes time. It's not something that you cannot learn, but it just takes time. While this team, they have done it. And especially as business angel or as an investor, I need much less to help them. They're just much faster to actually do the early stage stuff. And so both has been in my portfolio at the moment, roughly 3 years. And they have gone from this one has gone from 20K MRR to 55K MRR. It's actually profitable at the moment, but will it be kind of great investment ever? It's going to be kind of break even and it's going to bootstrap. So it's not going to be a VC case, but it's actually good business. I'm not saying it's bad business, but just is it going to be a VC funded business? Not really. And this one is raising their B round at the moment in 70, 80 million valuation. And I would tend to say markets, this company has a bigger market, better product idea than this one. They just execute damn well. And why I'm sharing this from an investor point of view, I think this is something that I didn't realize well in the first stage. I actually, when I built it, both of my first companies, I emphasized a lot on the diversity of functions. But what I didn't understand was basically the diversity of understanding the states at the same time. So I used to recruit a lot of kind of people coming from corporate, I had actually two difficulties there. I used to recruit a lot of people coming from corporate, so having that experience of a big company, and they had hard time to actually fit to a startup. But then the bigger problem was that people were saying that you cannot recruit from a corporate. So you need to recruit people who has been in a startup. But actually being a 2-person, 3-person company, and then going to 20-person company, then going to an 80-person company, it's not even, that's not kind of the solution either. So actually, when I had both in my team, I had two problems. I needed to teach corporate people how to behave in a small company. But at the same time, I had to teach kind of early stage startup people, how do you scale up? How do you become actually more like corporate? Because actually scaling up stuff, you just need to build more processes and go to kind of, unfortunately, bureaucracy, as we can call it, but more processes, more structures around. And that's kind of very often a pain for startup people. And not to say there's kind of any right or wrong on here, but just to know this, that when you're recruiting, and those problems are kind of, well, I would tend to say that try to hire certain type of either or, so you will have less problems to deal with. And maybe the other thing that makes this part or this team really fast growing is actually here that when we noticed that there's a gap, always kind of gap of experience, almost all of the founders had an advisor for the next stage. So the co-founders were really active in that who is going to mentor me of developing my functions as we need to grow. And that really helped us kind of, when the founders understood that they need to have each one mentoring, how are we going to do this when we grow? So they didn't have to guesstimate how do we do bigger, but they had always somebody to go in. And I think that's one of the important parts, not to have only kind of board members and mentoring for the CEO founder, but all the functions, meaning that how do you grow marketing when you go from 20 people to 50 people or so forth? They are very different. And typically the board members are not anymore giving advice there. Then you need kind of special advisors for each function. So I think this is kind of important that you could think. And I think from my experience, one of my kind of first biggest mistake on my first company was that I was founding that when I was 21 years old. Then I had basically a couple of my friends there working, but when we were doing this software and sensor stuff, we had a mechanical engineer, we had a software engineer, we had a electrical engineer or hardware guy there. So we had a lot of different domain functions there. And I couldn't mentor anybody of them. I couldn't tell how to do mechanical engineering well. So actually that mechanical engineer who was quite junior, he was a good guy, but he couldn't go to ask anybody for help. How would I do actually my part better? So in a small company, which was kind of very cross-functional team, everybody was actually lonely on their subjects, or they were early and they needed to master, well, I would say too much of stuff when we were doing that first company. So maybe, one actually interesting stuff related to this is what we've done now is actually we measured how this is affecting into data wise. So we've actually measured, or we interviewed more than 1,000 angel investors and VCs and asked them to do analysis of their portfolios when they found it, and how does that correlate into returns on their portfolio. And what was kind of fun to see is this is how well the portfolio has, or the company has performed versus the experience. We just took a simple experience score of that company, and we could clearly see that there's a correlation between the experience amount of the team to the returns of that investor. So that's related to experience. The other thing is diversity. So how diverse the team is, and there's also not that clear, but still clear correlation. But the thing that I wanted to actually say out loud here is diversity without experience. This is something that when you're thinking actually the company's early team, there doesn't seem to be any correlation. It actually starts to look the data that it's the other way around. So if you take very diverse team and they don't have the experience to be working with other people, then it's easy to collapse. So I think Daniel said it somewhat well there, but I would tend to say that look for experience and like a lot of like-mindedness, as that's the more important thing than the diversity. Diversity adds value, but it shouldn't be the thing that you look for the sake of diversity. So that's one part. Maybe then other parts regarding the team building. Well, I think important things of team building is what are you doing at each, what are you actually in the mission of your company's current thing? And let me find it. I'll use this couple of slides. So there's a lot of kind of different growth models that has been out there, like the lean canvas or startup takers, what you should be doing. But very often what the investors are looking, basically, what is the things that you need to be validating at each step of the company. So what I mean by this is that very often we investors tend to ask a lot of stuff from the startups that they should be kind of simulating what's the potential of the business, or how do you go to, what's your go-to-market plan and so forth. But the important thing is actually that when you have a business idea, all of these are hypotheses, but you should be validating them step by step. And when you're doing kind of the early stage thing, I think the first things in the pre-seed phase, what you should be kind of being able to narrow down is kind of what is the problem you're solving? Is it actually worth solving? Can you solve the problem? And if you can solve it, is it kind of somehow that you can solve it by able to beat the market? And then a little bit of analysis of, can you beat the market? And doing this stuff in the early stage, it's a lot about validation. There's kind of not that much of process you need to this. So you can actually hustle it with a couple of persons quite easily. And thinking what you need to do in seed stage, it starts to be with the questions that if you can solve the problem and the problem is worth solving, it's kind of, can you scale it? And instantly when you start to talk about scaling, it starts to be, can we do this 10 times, or can we do this 100 times, 1,000 times? And that requires very different kind of mindset or skill set. How do you do the same thing repeatably? So about founding product market fit and so for maybe the couple of other questions related to seed stage is about, can the company start being standing without the founders? It doesn't need to stand without the founders, but is there a possibility that you won't need the founders actually to be in the day-to-day operations? And well, I think that's mainly related to Finnish context. And then basically the A round, B round, it starts to be more about just how fast you scale. It goes more and more into process and rinse and repeating that stuff. So why I'm saying out loud this, I think, let me jump into a couple of more slides. So I think this is another way to say same stuff. So I think the kind of early stage part, it's really much going back and forth. And when you actually get to that product fit part, I would describe that's the calm part. Actually, things start to work, because here you have been going just doing a lot of kind of that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. But then you finally found it. So this part is actually quite calm. When you are kind of late seed stage, you get to the A round. But I would tend to say that, again, this B round stuff, that's painful. And again, going to the war side, because meaning that if you have to spend 2-3 million, well, nowadays A rounds are 5 to 10 million, but even kind of spending 5 million to scale one stuff, that's not that hard. Instead of you have to spend like 50 million on the same thing. And being able to effectively spend 50 million into the same thing, that's, well, I would tend to say that's where this chaos starts, because all the recruiting, being able, if you're in the early days, you can still handpick people, but how do you pick people when you need to get hundreds of the same people on your team, and being able to get maybe on board 10 people per week stuff. So all the kind of team processes are very different in that stage. And why I'm explaining all this stuff is practically that when you do a pivot, how does the pivot actually affect your company states? That really falls back to the question that do you need to adjust your team? So how far are you? Do you need to go to look at your really this new direction that you cannot really use your current team, or you have been recruiting, let's say, product teams that are scaling it to certain markets, which are very specific skill sets. And can you use them anymore in your pivot? That's really kind of very different impact on that. While if you're kind of doing, well, I would say even discussing a pivot in this kind of early stage, it's all about just looking things. So it's really pivoting. You have an idea, but next day you'll learn something from the customer. So I think until you're having that product fit, you should be kind of very careful of adding any persons to the team whom you know that is not kind of able to adjust into new requirements and change of directions, because there will be a lot of uncertainty and a lot of kind of new information that you learn in the early days. So I would tend to say that in the pivoting part, the more important than your team part on that pivoting is actually understanding where you are in your journey. Because if you understand that part, then you can start to communicate that to your team and evaluate your team. Is this team that you want to be building or taking into the journey? Is this team adding value to the journey? And at the same time, when you look at your journey, is that team enough to take to start the journey again? So those were a couple of things. Maybe then I could show you another interesting tool just for a co-founder's point of view. So one of the things that we did in our new startup in the Hopa platform was what you can test out this startup business idea evaluation. So it's a multiple choice questions related to typical business ideas. So basically there's kind of questions that we broke down how to build a typical business, and to explain you briefly how they look like. So there's kind of questions that are, for example, how has the team formed the understanding of the customer's problem? And the answers are the customer's problem are not known, or you have an hypothesis, and or the team has been discussing with a potential client, or you have been discussing with multiple clients, and you have been or you have kind of a lot of sales around that. And we have here broke down the business into 55 different multiple choice questions. Take it with a little bit of grain of salt that how accurate that is, but we were surprised that people are, or startups actually loving it. But the whole thing of this is it gives you kind of self-guidance on your business idea. But the more important, actually, let me show it how it actually practically happens. Just a second. Can you see my screen at the moment?
Yes, the site is loading. Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So let me give you an example. Why I'm saying this out loud is this is an example company out of this. So the most important thing about this is actually that you can put your co-founders doing the same questionnaire. And it's not actually about how accurate you are about it, but are you aligned with your team? So what you can do with this questionnaire is just go through the different questions and you start to know that, okay, how did you as a team align on the certain topic? And if you have very differing views, because this is actually one of the hardest problems that I've noticed as an angel, but also as an early stage startupper. How do I know that what does my co-founder think? So if you're not kind of aligned on, if you're not thinking that you're in the same place, then you typically taking the journey forward, it's really tough. So this tool helps you simply to actually spot the places where you disagree with your founder. And those are not to say that you need to disagree, but typically if you have a disagreement, you're just not maybe having the facts or you're understanding the different ways. So it's a nice tool actually just to check if you're wanting to, or where you should be discussing with your founder so that you are actually just in the same page of your steps. And so that's one thing that we're building at the moment, and you can go actually just, so it's free for startups. So if you want to take the test, just go to this address and it takes you roughly 20 minutes to fill the whole questionnaire, and then you can invite your co-founders there to do the same way, and you can discuss after that those topics. So I think that founder alignment is another thing, especially related to pivots. This is not the perfect tool when you're pivoting, but when you're needing to pivot, that's the one of the important issues is actually that you as founders, you're aligned at that point. Let me see if I think I have here some more things. Yeah, I think this is still the final slide I want to end up with the whole journey part. I think this relates to kind of those two startups that I showed from the team experience table, but also from a investor's point of view. The important thing is actually the trajectory that you're heading forward. You will see different types of startups. You will see dips on the trajectory that you go forward and your progress and so forth. But just that try to look at the your trajectory goes forward. When you zoom out from the daily operations, have you been doing progress in a monthly basis or quarterly basis? So are you doing progress in that sense? Because this is eventually what we're all are looking. And I think this is the thing that you should be also measuring when you're doing or taking your company's next steps. But at the same time, how does this relate to the team? When you look at the trajectory, again, you should be looking at who's keeping it on par on the current level, or who is the ones that are able to take it to the next steps. So I think that's all of what I want to say. I have a lot of more slides, but I think Daniel has been already telling most of that stuff. So I think we can now start to head to the questions part.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Thomas. I'm going to stop sharing your screen And yeah, I'm also going to add Danielle back to the sort of, let's call it stage, and I'm going to add myself as well, just for its timing. So first of all, thank you both for giving these presentations, giving these talks, and yeah, explaining a lot of important things and touching upon a lot of yeah, very good topics. So I guess let's jump into the questions. And Janis, you previously had your virtual hand raised. Are you ready to ask the question now?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Question goes to Daniel. Daniel, you talk about having shared mission and values when you hire people. Could you elaborate a little bit, because those words mission and values, those are very generic words, and most probably we are not talking about world peace, or maybe we are in some startups. So could you elaborate a little bit on that? I don't know, using some examples or whatever.
Yeah, that's a very fair and valid question. Yeah, I agree that they're being used mission and values and other things very generously. So yeah, in the past, I'm just trying to think how to share it without giving too much information. But basically, I've known somebody who had a co-founder, and there was a great opportunity. They raised a lot of money, and they didn't necessarily have the same interests, but basically the opportunity was there, the money was there, the market was there. But after, as Thomas just said, when push came to shove and they started pivoting, and it didn't quite work out the way they wanted to, they really couldn't find a common ground because they cared about very different things. It just at this point in time happened to bring them to a place where there was an opportunity to build a business together. But once things started moving, going sideways, and they had to change the business, they just spent half a year trying to pivot and pivot and pivot. And they were both kind of very frustrated, and even though they had the money in the bank and in theory the potential, it just wouldn't work. So I think this is kind of one example. I think it's mostly important on a co-founder level, but I think also on kind of employee level. So that's just an example. I think on a co-founder level, again, especially if you go to some sort of accelerator, a place where you get matched and stuff like that, when everything is it's a beginning. It's like, that's what I'm saying. It's a bit like dating. When you just start dating, there's a bit of affection and you're having a good time. That's great, but what happens when things are not going well? And if you don't know the person and you have different views of the world, for example, one can say, when it's hard, I try even harder. And the other one can say, well, if it's hard, it's not for me, right? That sounds very simple, but that can be exactly what separates two people. So I think just there could be different things. But what I've done personally after funding a few startups is that I set my own personal values, and I use them every time. Now that I founded a new business, I use that as my guiding principle.
Thomas, I see
Okay,
you have something to add.
Thanks. So yeah, I could take that from Daniel, and I think this is kind of one of the hardest things of how much of same values do you have. And I think kind of there's partially overemphasizes on that, and it's very important. But I think Daniel said it well, that how long the co-founder needs to actually be in the company. Because the other thing of this co-founding is that you're not looking for the one for the rest of the life. That would be the perfect part. But can you basically take your company to the next level during the time that you can stand the other person? And it's kind of a little bit like go dating, that can I be with this person with the next 3-4 years? I think if you know that it's going to be 6 months only, well, it's not really worth it. So it's not kind of one night gig. That's a consultant or something else, or an advisory board member, whatever. And it's important to think about kind of those values wouldn't do they impact versus what's just the skills and advice the person can give to you. And the co-founding tried to put a period of time for that, but also think about how many pivots and think about when the hard time comes that you would actually get through a couple of storms. The hard part is that if you cannot get any storms through with the person, then it's most likely not worth it.
Hey, thank you for the answers. Thank you, Jans, for the question. Next up, Misha, you had a question written down. Are you ready to maybe ask it out loud?
So yeah, hi. I think the classic situation is when you have a great friend who is a technical guy, and you both combine and start a great startup. In my case, I have tried previously for my first startup, and we didn't make it that far. And the problem was, of course, with me, with the experience, but second was the technical guy was really lazy, not into it, and really distracted by a lot of things. For the second one, how can I explain now? I do different things, but they work already. And for my second startup, I started with my own money. I have poured it inside a Latvian company, built my product till this moment. And right now, one of my friends, he's like a freelancer, and he builds different new features. But he admits also that he's not the quality that I can take my product to the next level. I made it this far, and my question is more like finding a co-founder, a CTO later on the stage, because I have the product already launched. And yeah, I want a CTO because I can give the parts of my company, of course, because I want him to be really motivated. So yeah, the question is finding a CTO later, and is the problem to investors if I already have a product. Sorry to talk too much, maybe.
Maybe Thomas, you're an investor. You can answer that.
Yeah, I would tend to say that the more complete your team is, the better. It's not like that we see perfect teams and we only invest into perfect teams. But I would tend to say that if you're a single founder, it's always tougher. And then it comes down to if you're a single founder, what's your ability to actually execute yourself? What is the kind of people that you get next to yourself around you? So it's not kind of missing a CTO at the moment. It's not a problem, I would say. But if that's a problem or a red flag over a lot of other red flags, then it's still a big so we can couple of red flags, it's okay. But when there's more and more of those, then that can be kind of a big one.
Thank you for the answer. So next up, we have a question. Question from Safi. Any tips on how and where to find advisors? Thomas, you touched upon a good point of finding advisors for different roles. So do you have any tips on where to find the good ones?
Well, I think Daniel said it, that always be recruiting. And that's kind of, well, maybe I will tell how I found it. My first co-founder was practically, I was doing a startup for industrial dishwashing, and we wanted to take industrial dishwashing global. And when I was looking for a co-founder for that, we were kind of tech geeks of knowing nothing about sales or actual food and beverage industry, and very little about dishwashing, by the way, because I was 21 years old and didn't do well at dishes. But meaning that actually the person that we were looking was kind of unicorn. So how did we end up finding that person was that I was talking in a training session about our business model, about for international sales, training session for international sales. They took us as an example company from a startup. And I was just giving our explanation what we are doing in that session. Then from that session, there was a lady who was based in France, and her spouse was a French-speaking or a French person, moved to Finland 10 years ago looking for a new job, and he was just starting consultancy of taking Finnish companies to France. And he had, in his background, he has been studying dairy industry. And we were kind of really perfect match. How did we found that person? Was it luck? You can say it was luck, but the amount of all the talking situations that I did, all the events that I went, all the possible marketing angles, it was just, why did it come from this certain place? It was because we made so much of noise that it will come from somewhere. But if you just make one event and try to do a bang, most likely not. But where you will match or get advisors, try to go, for example, I think if you need a sales advisor, go to where would you likely see them? Maybe in a sales training academies, where there are good teachers or so forth. If you would need a technical advisor, very different places, but try to think about where does these people circulate.
Maybe just said one thing is, yeah, totally always be recruiting. You have to learn to be a salesperson, even if you think you shouldn't be. I'm speaking to the technical people, especially being a technical person. But also, like, you should be using your carrots, right? So try to sell the idea. If somebody likes it, you can offer something in return. So there's usually some equity, and there's a lot of information on the web on how much you offer, but it doesn't have to be much. And the best deal, from my experience, is if you get those people to invest too. So they invest a bit of money, you give them some equity, they have skin in the game, they really care about the success of the company, then that can be like the best match. But you have to get them excited usually, because it's their time, and most people, the good people for sure, are very busy.
Thank you for the answers, and thank you for the question, Sophie. Next up, we have a question from Dimitris. What is good average size of a team before, during product market fit creation? Do founders do PMF alone? What team is too big for a PMF stage? So, whom of you is ready to answer this one?
I can just say that, I mean, I don't feel there's a right answer. I think if you're building a nuclear reactor, you're gonna need a pretty big team. if you're gonna build, I mean, you can build some really sophisticated things with one person too, and you can do prototyping. You can launch something. So I think the least amount of people, the better usually, because it kind of sets up the organization for success. But to the extent that you have the right skill set, so you can achieve the goal. So for example, the first startup I've built, I was the only developer, and there was a designer and the CEO for that matter. That's it. And we got to millions of people. But as I said, if it's complex technology, you won't be able to do it. If you're missing skills, you won't be able to do it. So yeah, it's always about, I think, like Thomas shared, there's these stages of raising money. So you need to raise enough money at the beginning so you can take it to the next level. So I think it really depends on the product. I sense if you say it might be too big, then it might indeed be too big. I think if you're asking this question, maybe you have people you don't need. But yeah, that's
I agree with Daniel, and maybe I would take it always the other opposite, that if you think it's too big, it's always too big. You should kind of always have a little bit of scarcity of resource. If you have to think about what are you doing with those teams or team members, then I would then say that that's the problem. But at the same time, you should always know how. So what Daniel said about that, it depends. But you should be the one or the expert of knowing actually what it takes. So one of the kind of, especially from an investor's point of view, one of the typical problems we see that we're recruiting, we want money that we start to recruit or planning of recruiting. Now we want to know that how are you actually working with the money, and you need to explain us that this is what you're going to do with the money. So this is the recruiting plan and so forth. And all that should be kind of clearly aligned to us. So it's bit like going to the bank for getting a mortgage. It's not like that, give us $500,000 and we'll think then what are we going to buy with this. You need to kind of be clear that this is the house that we're going to use this money for. And I think this kind of the mindset of what investors are actually investing, you need to be very clear on how to use the money. And that's actually answering partly this question, that how are you getting the product market fit? What does it need? And you need to explain it. And if that's very much off versus what we investors expect to be, most likely we don't think that you're up to the job. So we expect you to have this answer already.
Perfect. Thank you for the answers. Thank you for the question, Dimitris. So next up, let's pick your brain about, I guess, ideation in a sense. So Sabine asked this question. It's going to be a bit longer. So besides co-founding, what could you suggest when the focusing on idea goes very hard? In a sense that there is a willingness to make something great and useful, to make some actual impact. There is the direction and the field of interest, but it's very hard to focus on that one small thing where to start. So what would you suggest, both as founders? So who's ready to go first? Thomas.
Maybe I'll start with a bad example. So what did I do when I was not able to focus my team? So my second company, we sold it to a publicly listed company because we were not able to focus it. So basically what the other company that we were building, we were thinking that's going to be the unicorn, but we were able to measure actually tap water drinkable or not. But one of our biggest issues with that company, well, we were kind of like tap water drinkability. How big is the market? You cannot really fail this. But the big problem of that whole thing is that what's the actual right answer for what's the market that we should take? Should we take Finnish companies, or should we look at the Baltics? Should we go to water treatment? Should we go to residential houses? Everybody's kind of interested about that, and everybody's a stakeholder. So how could we focus our team to do one solution? And there I had a team issue actually coming in. I couldn't find myself skills to put our propeller heads actually to focus. So always when there came a technical difficulty, they wanted to go to the next thing instead of solving those technical difficulties. And that made us that we just noticed that I cannot get this team focusing. They will always jump to the kind of where the grass seems to be kind of greener. And I would then to say from this example, it's also when you're kind of having a lot of possibilities, it's not that important that you're actually choosing the best possibility if even the third best is still a viable business. But can you execute on that and keep your team focused? And explaining this to your team that you need to be able to do that. I'll go to the football examples. You can play the way that Germany does, or the way that Brazil does, or many different ways of playing football. But you need to select one. If you try to play the game all the ways, it's not going to work out at all. So I think that's kind of related to ideation. It's about how do you choose the idea? How do you preserve is this idea worth progressing? And then making some agreements that we are not going to swap into a next idea until we have done certain things for this idea. How lucrative they are, you're just not going to focus on them, because as a startup, you practically have all the possibilities in the world, but it's not that you're going to do all the possibilities in the world. So you just need to be able to focus, and that's team effort.
Thank you. Daniel, anything to add about this ideation part?
I'll just say that it's very tough. I think, yeah, I think generally there's kind of a few reasons why somebody would found the company. One is that they found a problem that they feel isn't met. The other one is that they care about a particular area, for example, climate change or health. And the third is that they want to make money, and they're all valid. But I think it goes back to your values and your mission. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? You just want to make money? Do you want to be independent? Do you care about a particular problem? And hopefully that can help kind of guide you towards the next level and see which idea makes more sense. At least that's how I found it for me. And as I said, like, I don't know, Thomas, how quickly you sold your companies, but from my experience and what I've seen around, it's a 5 to 10 year journey at least. So don't expect like, oh, we're going to come up with an idea 2 years, you know, we're going to make money. You should think about it as something you're willing to dedicate a long time to. So yeah, just kind of look in your heart and see what drives you and what will keep you going. And if you have competing ideas, see which one is more appealing. If it's the impact or the money you're going to be making or how exciting it is, or there can be different reasons, but I think you should just try and be true to yourself if you can.
Perfect. Thank you for the answers. Thank you for the questions, Sabine. So currently I see those are the last of the questions. Do we have any more questions? Because we have a couple of more minutes or to use for this. Okay. Currently, it doesn't seem like it. Nobody's typing away. Nobody's raising their virtual hands. Well, in this case, then I do want to say a huge thanks both to you, Daniel, and to you, Thomas, for joining here today, for sharing your experience, your knowledge with us, with the whole group of the Startup School of Schools course. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. Do you have any parting words or suggestions or something you want the participants to remember?
Enjoy the journey, as I said before. It's you gotta have fun. If you're not gonna have fun, you're not gonna make it.
Exactly. It's all about the journey. Then again, remember, the journey is not only fun. So I think that's the kind of both angles. But when it's too much of pain, try to balance it.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And of course, thanks for everyone who was here tonight and who's going to be watching this in the recording. And of course, a couple of things I need to remind you of is that on this Wednesday, we are having the sort of program check-in call. As I said at the beginning, it's let's try to make it around 30 minutes long. Just if you have any feedback, if you have any questions, I will be there to answer them. It's not mandatory to participate in it, but you do have the Zoom link and the calendar event in your calendar. So yeah, possibly see you there. And next week, we are going to be focusing on a topic, also on a very important topic, and it's going to be managing your burn rate. So yeah, that's what's going to happen on next Monday. And of course, another reminder that you already have 2 tests in the test channel on Slack. So if you haven't yet, feel free to fill them out. The test for this session, as previously, I am going to post it at some point during Wednesday. As for the slides and the recording, I will post it on Slack tomorrow in the resources channel. So once more, huge thanks to Thomas and Daniel for being here tonight. And of course, thanks to you all for being here as well. So have a great evening and see you on Wednesday, I guess then. Bye.